Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. All right, everybody's alive and awake this morning. I am excited about our next session, The Road to Equitable Investment in the Capital Region. If any of you are old enough to remember the television show Charlie's Angels, that's what I feel like. Yeah, I would be Charlie, and these are my angels. Actually, I'm Preston Castile, and I'm excited to moderate this particular panel. A few housekeeping notes before we get started. I want to thank our session sponsors, Lee Michaels Fine Jewelry, plus all the summit sponsors who are listed in your program and in the slideshows between sessions. The summit would not be possible without their support. Our first guest, my angel, Councilwoman Chana Banks, has made a lifelong commitment to move her community forward and will always work to foster an end to joblessness, neighborhood blight, and poor public education through using the tools of public policy, legislation, and public involvement. Her overall vision is to improve her constituents' quality of life, regardless of race, class, gender, or socioeconomic status. She continues to believe that there is a solution to every problem and that when we work together, everybody wins. Chana Banks, everyone. I'm going to introduce all of my angels and then we'll let them present. Next is Lanisha Jackson. She is the project and community planner for the Center for Planning Excellence. Lanisha brings 9 years of private sector experience ranging between transportation, housing, and community planning and development to CPEX. Her expertise includes data analyst, community planning and outreach, and geographic information systems. A round of applause for Ms. Jackson. And Gretchen Seymour serves as the Director of Planning and Special Projects at Build Baton Rouge, responsible for urban planning-related programs and place-based initiatives. With over 15 years of community development experience, Gretchen has worked for Los Angeles County as a planner and the City of Los Angeles as a project consultant, providing the best practices for urban planning and real estate. Ms. Gretchen Seymour. And last, but certainly not least, Ms. Ebony Starks. Ebony is the Vice President of Place-Based Initiatives at the Huey and Angelina Wilson Foundation. She brings with her nearly 15 years of experience in nonprofit management, fundraising, and philanthropy. She is a vocal advocate who works to identify the resources needed for families and communities to thrive. Her career has garnered a unique blend of experience in the public, private, and non-profit sectors. Ms. Ebony Starks. And now, Councilwoman Chana Banks.
Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I am so happy to be here. I remember being, when I first started coming to the summit, I was a guest of a developer, and I had to call him on Thanksgiving to let him know that I would be a panelist this time. He hasn't been as active in the last couple of years as due to a bout of cancer, but I just, wanted to acknowledge this person and just thank him for opening the door, and now I'm here. So I am the councilwoman for District 2. If you're familiar with District 2, you would know that it consists of 80% of the city of Baker, Scotlandville, Beechwood, Brownsville, everything north of Hooper Road to the Comeet River. Upon election in 2013, it was the first time after the 2010 census. So that was the first time the new map had been constructed, and it actually was a challenge because it was the first time you suddenly had a very diverse constituency covering 3 zip codes. I'm a third-generation resident of the community of Scotlandville. So upon running, I thought I was running for Scotlandville because 40 years ago when we got our first representation, that is the area that was covered. However, as I indicated, it expanded, but still that is my heart. That is the part of the community where I have seen the least investment and where there has been a significant amount of sacrifice on behalf of federal, state, and local government. Because of that, when you see me working not with an ask, but with a demand. It is based on the fact that it is in Scotlandville, where I grew up in 1960, was a middle-class subdivision made up of Exxon, now where it was called several things, including then, but plant workers and teachers, whether they were K through 12, Southern University faculty. It comprised of homeowners. Schools were Scotlandville High School and Southern Lab, which drew from all over the parish. So I have been caught up in somewhat of a time warp of those times. Having been a third generation, I saw when I-10 North came and no longer were people to get from north to south went through Scotland Avenue and Scenic Highway and Plank Road, but they went over us, killing the entire retail, housing, our Black Wall Street was totally desecrated because of that, without any reciprocity. As a child of Scotlandville, I saw the expansion of the Baton Rouge Airport, which took 3 middle-class subdivisions where those people, again, did not have reciprocity as it relates to home ownership in the Scotlandville area. So they lived on College. That's when you start having the Stratford Place and the Mayfairs and the other areas outside of the Scotlandville community. Our school, Scotlandville High School, where my mother was one of the first graduates in 1956. As a result of the 40-year desegregation of the East Baton Rouge Parish school system, our neighborhood school, Scotlandville, was turned into a strictly magnet school. So unless you were from the community and you had a certain GPA, you could no longer go to your school. So students in the Scotlandville community were shipped to Central High School, to Baker High School, to Zachary High School, and the students from those schools with the GPA were sent to Scotlandville. It never ceased to amaze me when I meet a Caucasian male or female and tell me they graduated from Scotlandville Magnet High School. But that was that time. During that time, of course, any good parent that had the means, if my child is being bused to Scotland, from Scotlandville to Zachary, to Baker, to Central, I'm gonna move to Baker, to Central, to Zachary. Again, losing many of our residents. Moving forward, my goal today here with all the stakeholders, my goal is to repair, restore, and rebuild the community of Scotlandville. I'm thankful for CPEX that has led an effort that is a collaboration with the Southern University Foundation and many of the organizations, including me in Scotlandville, because what we know is that quality of life for the Scotlandville community plays a huge impact of the quality of life of students, employees of the Southern University system. So if you're going to increase the enrollment of Southern University, you have to make sure that there's adequate student housing. If you're going to have more students, you're going to need more employees. They need to have middle-class housing where they can live close to the school. You have to have them in a position where if there's a lunch break, they don't have to go halfway around the world. So that is what all of this is about as it relates to our master plan. We've had several master plans, but I believe this year we're gonna have one master plan, and we're gonna work it one day at a time. and you're going to see a 365 change in what Scotlandville is. It would be better than it was, but it most certainly be the recipient of what is deserved for that community and the residents. Thank you very much.
Good morning, everyone. As Preston mentioned, I'm Lanisha I'm Lanisha Jackson, and I'm a community planner with the Center for Planning Excellence. So between October 2019 and October 2021, CPEX worked with Southern University to develop a campus master plan and an accompanying community plan for Scotlandville, the neighborhood that surrounds the university. The strategy showed that Southern had the understanding that in addition to developing its campus, in order to provide that 21st century experience it envisions for its students, it also needed a plan to develop the surrounding community. And as it stands now, several of its students reside near LSU to enrich their experience as opposed to living in Scotlandville for all of the reasons that Shauna just mentioned. Lack of basic services, lack of a grocery store, beauty supply store, etc. So the campus plan focused on physical improvements to upgrade the campus and encourage enrollment. It also included improvements to outdoor spaces on campus, so it's quad and some of the natural spaces on campus like Lake Kernan and the Bluff. And even though Southern spearheaded their community plan, they also wanted to include projects within the campus plan that contribute to the development within Scotlandville by creating destinations that aren't located on campus that would still encourage visitors from outside the area and boost economic development, and also create spaces that could be used by the community and faculty as well. So some of these projects are already constructed and planned and proposed, and most of them are located along Harding Boulevard, which is immediately outside of campus. Further into the community, Southern plans to leverage some of its university-owned properties to support redevelopment and stimulate private development along Swan Avenue, which is also a major thoroughfare within Scotlandville. Again, to create gathering spaces where students as well as the community can engage. So things like restaurants, boutique stores, etc. Moving on to the Scotlandville Community Plan, the main goals were to strengthen connections between Southern University and the community, and to lay the groundwork for overall revitalization, where there is quality housing and retail and services. And in this process, we had robust public engagement to develop a vision that was representative of the community, which you see on the right, divided into these 5 buckets. At the outset of this process, we had a community needs survey, and I'd like to highlight some of the major issues that were submitted by community residents, and the fact that these are basic things that anyone would want or even expect in their community. Just make the community look nice, a grocery store, programs and spaces for youth to engage and recreate, the ability to walk and bike safely. And they aren't asking for the most futuristic or expensive things, but we do need to question why they don't have those basic things that other communities do. And we also have to ask ourselves, how did we get there? On the survey, we also had some open-ended responses, and I'd like to read a couple of them for you, because it's one thing to know that, yes, Scotlandville lacks some resources, but it's another thing to hear their lived experiences, their raw frustration, and what was most heartbreaking personally is how aware they are that the rest of Baton Rouge doesn't experience what they do. So of course, this first person is meeting fatigued, and then they continue. You already know what the residents of Scotlandville need. You've been hearing it for years. Just give us residents the same living environment as the white folks. Don't continue to waste my time with this type of redacted. This is an old presentation, I'm sorry. When you know none of y'all will implement positive, necessary improvements to this community, including Scotlandville and Southern University as part of Baton Rouge, just as much as South Baton Rouge and LSU. More action, less talk, surveys, and meetings. Residents of Scotlandville are forced to travel to other communities for groceries, restaurants, movies, office supplies. There is an effort to make pocket communities where basically you can walk within 20 minutes, and of course, Scotlandville does not have that. It is my hope that Southern University and the Scotlandville community can come together and develop something great. It is past time for this area to be as marketable and presentable as other areas in Baton Rouge. I, as many others, value this area, and it's time for others to do so as well. It is critical that students and the community have community access to the things they need, just like the students at LSU. Our students and community members should not have to go across town to fulfill their everyday needs. Scotlandville should be representative of a college community. This other one should have been redacted as well, but I'll just quickly sum up. Don't just talk about it, be about it. Oh, that's right, you probably live in white communities and these deplorable conditions don't affect you, so you really don't give a damn. You're just going through the formality to be politically correct. And well, you can read the rest, but based on the last few comments, it seems that there is still some positive energy around things possibly and hopefully turning around. So it sounds like you all are working to better the Scotlandville area. It's been a long time coming in the making, and I hope to see great things come out of this. Also, let's make Scotlandville great again. So the plan was adopted in August of 2022 by the Planning Commission and the Council, and hopefully this marks the beginning of moving toward revitalization. Notice I did not say the beginning of revitalization. And I think that while the community may celebrate this initial win of having an updated plan, it needs to start seeing implementation and action to change that trajectory of neglect that they have experienced for such a long time. And this is, I guess, a glimmer of hope at that intersection at Scotland Avenue and Scenic Highway. There is some ongoing economic development right there. So there is some things happening, but definitely a lot more needs to be had. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name's Gretchen Seamers. I'm with Build Baton Rouge. We are the redevelopment authority for the city parish. And we were rebranded in 2019 as Build Baton Rouge with a renewed focus on community-driven, place-based initiatives. We're a relatively young redevelopment authority in that we were established in the wake of Hurricanes Katrina and Rita. And we do have many of the typical capacities of redevelopment agencies across the country. There are a couple things about our agency in our statutory authority that are unique. Number one is that we are directed to work closely in collaboration with private and nonprofit partners. We're not doing any of this work in a silo, and we work especially closely with our philanthropic partners locally. Like most redevelopment agencies, our directive is to address blight, be a driver of economic development, and create affordable housing. And while we are the redevelopment authority for the entire city parish, we focus our work in 9 redevelopment areas. You can see them on the screen above. These are adopted by the Metro Council, and you may notice that these are areas that may not, excuse me, these are areas that may not have market forces that are enough to spur economic development alone. And so they do need some assistance from the public sector. We're also the land bank for the city parish. And while we have no eminent domain power, we do have a right of first refusal on adjudicated properties. And this has allowed us to be strategic in site assembly for our development projects and our partnerships. We also directly purchase property and accept donations. Some of our properties in our land bank have long-term, up to 99-year ground leases, and this has allowed us to grow sustainably and expand our impact over time. Land banking is often given a bad rap because of the misconception that it inflates land prices and leads to gentrification, but it's actually one of the better tools in our toolbox as a public agency focused on elimination of blight and equity in particular, because we can condition the projects, the property sale or partnerships on meeting the needs of the community, revitalization goals, affordable housing goals, et cetera, to ensure that neighborhoods remain affordable and development occurs equitably. And so our focus over the last couple of years has been on Plank Road, which was, as Councilmember Banks noted, historically, until the construction of the Interstate 110, one of the main north-south corridors on the west side of town. The area saw tremendous disinvestment and white flight as the growth of sprawling new communities on the outskirts of town continued in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. It was selected as a master plan not only because of this historic disinvestment, the blight, and the needs of the community that we heard, but also due to the opportunity to leverage a major investment going in, which was the bus rapid transit. The BRT is currently in design and will connect North Baton Rouge to LSU, which is going to open up a lot of employment possibilities for people who live in North Baton Rouge, and also open up North Baton Rouge to the people of South Baton Rouge. The plan was developed in partnership with many local leaders in North Baton Rouge, and it went on to earn a $5 million grant for implementation from the JP Morgan Chase Foundation. The majority of that implementation funding is going towards small business lending for business owners in the community, and also for seed funding for real estate development projects. We are about 2 years into the 3-year grant term for that implementation program, and we have seen some delays due to construction cost inflation, COVID-related materials delays, but other aspects of the program, such as our community land trust and Pocket Park, are on schedule and in full swing. And on the horizon, we're going to be focusing on the Florida corridor. Last year, in partnership with the Baton Rouge Area Chamber, we created a new TIF district, a tax increment finance district, to capture some of the retail tax increment surrounding the area of the Amazon Fulfillment Center at the former Cortana Mall site. The TIF district has a separate board of directors. Build Baton Rouge is the administrator of the district, and in the enabling resolution, there are a number of programs that are to be undertaken during the 5 years of the tax increment district. The first being a master plan to plan for the district to address economic development and maintaining that tax increment, as well as equity issues for that community. Florida Boulevard is a huge opportunity citywide, because many people in Baton Rouge in our mental map see that corridor as a dividing line between north and south of the city, and having a unifying focus on the area is going to help us address a lot of the equity issues we have around that area. We'll focus on a community-centered approach to the plan, and it may also incorporate premium transit as well. And really what the economic focus is, not only to attract external investment, but to help facilitate business development for the people and businesses that are already in place in that area. Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Full disclosure, I really wanted to stay in my chair and pretend like I was on the Oprah show and just talking to everyone like we were friends, but I was outnumbered. Camille. So I am here at the podium, and I can just barely see over this computer, but I'm so happy to be here with you all today, and I know I'll get my chance later to pretend like I'm on the Oprah show. I'm Ebony Starks. I'm with the Wilson Foundation. I am speaking to you today with a little bit of a different lens as it comes to planning. So I have always worked on the nonprofit side, trying to find resources and funding to support community redevelopment efforts. The Wilson Foundation is a private family foundation. It's been operating through grant making in the wider sort of capital region for about 22 years, to the tune of about $70 million. And for the majority of that time, it's been mostly reactive, or what we know as traditional grant making. So you open up a grant cycle, organizations submit their applications, they sort of tell you the programs that they're working on, where they're working on them, and the outcomes that they hope to achieve with these programs. And that's sort of the traditional philanthropic lens that not only this foundation has been working with, but foundations across the country. However, in 2019, the foundation embarked on a strategic planning process. And this is something that nonprofits, businesses do all the time, but this one was different. The board, the leadership really wanted to think about how can we move from a less reactive lens to a more proactive lens. And this is something, it's a trend that's been slowly happening nationally across the philanthropic landscape. This is something called place-based investment, or impact investing. How do we focus resources in a really targeted geographic area? Not regional, not parish or county, I'm from Georgia, but how do we focus on a small area and make a long-term impact? One that's measurable, one that's coordinated, right? And when I say a geographic area, people are like, okay, so you mean a city? What do you mean? We mean an area that's less than 3 square miles. And in terms of planning, that seems small, right? That seems almost insignificant. But the issue is the neighborhoods that we're looking at with place-based investment, these small neighborhoods, 1 square mile, 2 square mile, 3 square miles, a lot of these neighborhoods hold 80% or more of the minority populations that have been placed in these areas through geographic segregation, through the building of highways, intersections, just like the history of Scotlandville, that have run through and over these communities. How do we invest in a way that creates long-term outcomes following long-term disinvestment? So this was a question that the Wilson Foundation really wanted to answer at the beginning of this year, and they brought me on in March to help answer that question. We started simultaneously with a neighborhood analysis that really focused on 8 zip codes in the area that we refer to as North Baton Rouge. These zip codes, these places, Scotlandville, Eden Park, Fairfields, they don't necessarily refer to themselves as North Baton Rouge. But when we look at Florida Boulevard as this dividing line that really delineates the have from the have-nots, the amenities from the no amenities, the access to retail from those who have overwhelming access, you start to realize how you other even in language, right? So I just want to acknowledge that, what we're referring to as North Baton Rouge, and really started on a journey of identifying a model for place-based investment and an area for place-based investment at the same time, which has been no small undertaking. To do that, the foundation started with convening a group of community stakeholders to identify and follow up and research the purpose-built communities model. And I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with that model. It started in Atlanta. Right now, East Atlanta, the neighborhood where Drew Charter School is, was really the model for purpose-built communities. It started with a traditional housing project that was then completely invested in and redeveloped. A charter school, housing was created to create a community that now is thriving some 20 years later. This model focuses on housing, education, economic vitality, and community wellness, again, within a really small targeted area. Through this process, we were able to narrow down a few neighborhoods for initial analysis. That was Fairfields, Eden Park, Ardendale, Scotlandville, and the Plank Road corridor. From that, we then looked at what we know were indicators that would make this model successful. Those are poverty rate, geographic square area, proximity to other investment, what we know as tipping point communities, right? Vacant land, all of this other things that we know could make this model impactful. Through that process, which has lasted for about 6 months, along with community and neighborhood engagement, we have been able to narrow down the area of focus, right? We want to move away from target area, target of what, to an area of focus, an area of impact, an area of investment, an area of value. And those neighborhoods are Northdale, Fairfields, and Eden Park. And there are other neighborhoods, Easytown, Bogan Walk, that fit within this wider footprint. This is for initial implementation. We're really excited for what the future holds with implementation of this place-based model, the creation of a purpose-built community. And we recently just had a neighborhood stakeholder meeting where we asked, what would it take for you to partner and trust us to move forward in a collaborative way? And overwhelmingly, I don't have any actual quotes because we might need a little redaction too, but overwhelmingly, consistency. Consistency. That was the response that we got. So often these communities are targets of planning efforts that are shelved. There is a change in administration, they aren't followed through. And what we need to show is consistency. So that's where we are. Happy to discuss more. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Ebony. Oprah would have been proud. I will tell you, look, that was great. Given that you were expected to do that from there, it was just seamless. But it also was a great bookend in terms of where Chana began with her comments about Scotlandville and the disinvestment and maybe some of the unintended consequences of some of the things that happened there. The thing that stuck out to me the most was when you mentioned the airport and that 4 middle-class subdivisions were displaced as a result of it. So when I hear that, and this was done as a result of some intentional planning. You don't just pop up and bring an airport, but you've got an airport and it had an impact and it had some negative consequences on Scotlandville. But I thought that was great when you think about place-based planning and actually identifying communities. I love to be able to tie those in together. So I want to deviate from the script a little bit, ladies, but I really would like for you to talk about, Shauna, in connection with Ebony's comments, so where we are in Scotlandville, in your community in particular, how some of the strategies you've heard and where do we go from an equity standpoint. And I've got to underscore, because we may have glossed over just a little bit what we talk about when we say the equitable investment, and that is when certain communities lose out. You remove entire subdivisions because the community has decided for the greater good to bring in an airport, and poor communities suffer as a result of it. Or we don't invest in a community, you don't have grocery stores. Those decisions impact real people. They impact your people, your constituents, Jono. Where do we go from here?
So, well, I think we're on the right track. I was just thinking in 2013, my first agenda item was to approve moving people from University Place behind Southern University because of the North Wastewater Treatment Plant. So imagine these things have been going on from 1973 to 2023 in just one community of Scotlandville. So many points that all of these ladies have made, and I'm going to go with Ebony first. Again, I'm born in the 60s, right? So I've seen a lot. One of the things that I really like about what the Wilson Foundation is they are dealing with a part of the community that has always been Black. There aren't that many of them. for the communities that when I was growing up, the only high schools that were Black in Baton Rouge was Scotlandville, Capitol, and McKinley. All the other schools, which what you also see were also the other high schools, they were all Black, all white high schools. So these communities, as things moved and people moved, those are, if you look back, think back now, those are the three communities that have faced the most disinvestment. I actually can chronologically determine white flight based on my own personal job history. I started working at age 15 at what was National Food Store, and it became Scenic IGA. It was on Scenic Highway across from where ExxonMobil. 3 years later, that entire corridor was dead, and I started working off Plank Road at the Woolworth in Delmont Village. How many of y'all know about the Woolworth in Delmont Village? 3 years later, all of this is as a result of things that were not in control of those communities. 3 years later, they opened Bar Marché. That was the hot spot. I started working at Baker's Shoe Store in Bar Marché. We know the history of Bar Marché. After the whole Florida corridor, which Gretchen mentioned, I started working at Sears in Cartana Mall. Again, part of that Florida corridor. And I just refused to go to the Mall of Louisiana, you know. And so that is literally, and this is the story you just heard. Scotlandville, Dixie, Florida Boulevard, all of those areas have been impacted by things that were not for the greater good. Like Preston said, it was strategy, and it was deemed necessary, but the consequences. But I see hope here today. I see where people get it. They really get it. And I am very excited about what the future holds. I'm so glad that we don't have to apologize. I just have one last thing. The best city planner could not have planned Scotlandville. Scotlandville has the footprint of Southern University. It has Howell Place, which has been that is 30 years old and still not complete. The Baton Rouge Airport, an economic engine. Thank God for Corey and the Baton Rouge Zoo with an initial $30 million investment between Greenwood Park and probably 60 now, Corey. It started off at 30. But all of those things, can you imagine working within those four dynamic entities, what our community would be with Scotlandville and beyond? That's where I am. And I'm very excited about working with these ladies and so many more out there. And the change you see in Scotlandville, those are young Black developers, 35 and under. And that is what I am extremely glad to be able to connect them with these ladies.
You know, sitting on stage here with Chana Banks, many of you don't know the many sides of Chana Banks, and she is a fearless advocate for her community. She's sitting here very elegant, very sophisticated, but when she needs to, she can take off her earrings and her high heels and get down and make sure things happen.
I took 2 nerve pills, y'all. I'm doing good.
Yeah, and that's critically important because I will tell you, I'm not sure if Boo Thomas is here in the audience, but about 8 or 9 years ago, when I was asked to join the CPEX board, I said, I'm not sure I want to do that, Camille Manning Broom, because CPEX didn't focus on North Baton Rouge. I went to Southern University. I was student body president. I was national alumni president. I loved Southern University, but I hated the fact that our community seemed to pay very little attention to North Baton Rouge. And as I sit on the stage here today as chairman of the board of CPEX, and then I heard Lanisha's incredible comments about the work that's going on, not only with that anchor University, that project there that is an economic driver, but then working with the community, but not just planning, but actually getting things done. Can you talk a little bit more about the value of the university and anchor institutions like that, the work of CPEX a little bit more, and how that helps to bring back that community that lost so much over time from an equity standpoint, and where are we now and where do we go?
Yeah, so I think that as an institution of higher learning, Southern University has a vested interest in ensuring that Scotlandville can provide a certain quality of life for its students and by extension, the residents that are there. So just to ensure its own viability, as students are looking at schools, they're gonna come to Southern, they're gonna take a look around, they'll look at Scotlandville, they'll take a look around, and then they'll compare notes with other areas that they're also looking at to go to school, and they'll make their decisions based on that. And so Southern has to continue to invest in the community, and even outside of developing just the built environment and great spaces where the community can gather, I think programmatically, they can also invest in Scotlandville. So they can work with the local high schools and ensure that there is a continuous stream of enrollment, which can overall increase educational attainment for Scotlandville. They can also be proactive in hiring people who are unemployed so that unemployment rates can go down as well. But I also want to say that the responsibility of the viability of Scotlandville cannot solely be on Shauna Banks, it cannot solely be on Southern University, that it is a group effort of local leaders, stakeholders, CPEX, even philanthropic organizations as well. I think from what we've heard so far at the conference, in terms of equity, a rising tide does not necessarily lift all boats, and so we have to be purposeful about that too.
Thank you for those comments. I've got to say, you know, I've been doing this a long time, and that is volunteering in the community, trying to figure out ways that we can make us better. And Ebony, what you said about what you observed in Atlanta, the fact that a community got together, they coalesced around a school, in this case a charter school, built housing in that community, and it really brought back and revitalized that particular area. And when I look through the audience here and I think about the fact that New Schools for Baton Rouge, for example, 10, 12 years ago, through efforts with the Baton Rouge Area Foundation, worked to do a lot of that with one piece of the puzzle, with education. And that is, how do we invest more into education in certain communities? I think about Florida Boulevard, for example, now where we now have 3 high schools along that corridor with Helix Mentorship Academy, with Collegiate Academy, with Geo Prep in the Sherwood Forest area that didn't exist 10 years ago. You've got Helix Aviation Academy at the airport. We've got pieces of the puzzle with education. Heard a wonderful panel discussion with regard to housing earlier today, and the fact that the Wilson Foundation, David, is now looking to put money. A lot of times we just have conversations, but the fact that, to your point, Councilwoman Banks, that organizations like the foundation, that they're willing to invest in the community and guide us further. What do you think? Tell us more about those strategies and where we're going to go and what you see happening. I was very intrigued because you gave an example, a concrete example of, yes, this is a community that was disinvested, but we did these things here. And look at where they are. It didn't happen overnight. It took 20 years, but it happened. Tell us more.
So, you know, the Eastlake community in Atlanta, can you hear me?
Yep.
There we go. I'm getting my dream, right?
There you go.
Is one of 28 purpose-built communities across the nation. And that's something I wasn't able to include there, but I think it's important to know that this model has been replicated. But, you know, people say if you've seen one purpose-built community, you've seen one purpose-built community. So though Drew Charter is at the heart of the Eastlake Foundation's model and the Eastlake community, this model looks different across the country. It looks different in the North, it looks different in the South. You know, it's something that's unique to the neighborhood and the community it serves. One focus that is clear across all of those communities across the nation is the importance of education in proximity to your neighborhood. Neighborhood schools serving as the center and the heartbeat of the community. And that's something here in Baton Rouge, I think school choice is so important, but it's something we struggle with. A huge amount of students in any given neighborhood, particularly in the neighborhoods that we're looking at, are bussed out of the community. It's hard to have measures of success for those neighborhoods. It's hard to track supports for those students when they're spending the majority of the time out of their neighborhoods. So a huge focus of this model is how do we create excellent educational options, whatever that may look like, within a 3-mile radius of where our families live. How do we lower barriers to educational opportunities and increase those supports? Mentoring, quality out of school time programs. And another really, really important part of this model, and some say the backbone, is mixed income housing. How do we have equitable and diverse housing options for families? How do you deconcentrate poverty? And you do that through housing and through education. And so this model, again, I think that it's proven that it works. It never quite looks the same. And while it is, I think, something that can be replicated, this is long-term work, and it's collaborative. You can't say, I'm gonna do this model in this neighborhood. Is the neighborhood open to partnering with you to work on this model? It's not something that happens to a community, but with a community. So I think there's a lot that we're going to learn. We're not experts on this, and we're not moving this forward individually. No one foundation can spur the reinvestment of communities that have been disinvested over decades. But I think, and I hope, that we can spur the collaboration and the provision of resources that can start that redevelopment and that transformation.
Thank you. There was a part of me that said, look, you're never going to get communities to come back unless you have a strong economic driver that's a part of it. And that's certainly true. But I was a part of the Canvas trip to Greenville, and I was amazed at what they had done. They focused on the downtown area, and that was part of our trip, and there's certainly other areas of that community, but it was a very conscious effort to bring back and revitalize that part of the community. And there are other areas in our community, Gretchen, that we're focused on, and you touched on that a little bit from your end. Is it all about the economy? Are there things that we do beyond bringing, for example, an Amazon? Boy, having Amazon come, I think will do a lot potentially for the community that it's in. What do you see happening around those sorts of businesses, and is that actually a necessary part to revitalize a community?
Certainly, is this, no. Oh, sorry. Certainly, investment is necessary to revitalize a community, right? I think the question is, what does that investment look like, and how are we qualifying, equitable investment? I think that, not all capital is created equal. What I've heard today, from everyone here on the panel is that a collaborative approach focusing on people, places, and the economy is really key because, when we seek external, out-of-state investment. On the one hand, especially on Plank Road, we are praying for that. We are praying somebody, corporate philanthropic sponsor will come in and plop in some income-restricted housing or, some commercial amenities to serve the people in the community. And that is incredibly important. At the same time, we know from other cities around the country that that's really not the answer. That having a pattern of that external investment really is going to lead to displacement and gentrification and not really lift up the people who are living in the communities right now. And so we have to focus more on a longer term, a wider lens, and figure out how to lift up the people who are already in the communities and make their lives and hopefully the lives of their children in a generation better.
So this is kind of a broader sort of philosophical question because Councilwoman Banks, you said something in the beginning, and that is that you could kind of track sort of white flight and disinvestment based on the jobs that you had. People followed jobs where they were, irrespective of where you lived. You needed a job. You needed to be able to provide for yourself. You followed the money. You followed the ability to have a means of sustaining yourself. So how do you do that? When I look at what's happening in, say, St. George and the southern part of Baton Rouge, that, you know, if you looked at it from the outside, you would just say, well, people are just following the money. Their communities are picking up and leaving. Families are picking up and leaving for self-preservation or opportunities. How do you balance that? When you look at Scotlandville, North Baton Rouge, the community that I love so greatly, but the fact of the matter is that families of different races chose to leave, black and white, because there seemed to be some sort of disinvestment. Is that sort of a misnomer? Is it a false narrative? Is that true, China Banks?
So certainly there's an element of truth. You mentioned the Canvas trip, and I remember the Canvas trip that we went to before the pandemic. I can't remember where it was, though.
Cincinnati?
Cincinnati. So the Canvas trip in Cincinnati is when I kind of had a shift as it relates to a continuous comparison of the investment in the southern part of the parish versus the northern part of the parish, because it was in Cincinnati where I saw a concentrated effort to do, as Gretchen said, where they utilized the people in the community to bring about change. And even their foundation, the way they handled. So an example would be, there was an area that we visited that reminded me of the Scotlandville Strip. If you know the Scotland Avenue Strip, is from Swan Street to Sora Street, the picture that you saw on the screen. And across the way is a railroad track and a Scotlandville Plaza that was all adjudicated property. So at Cincinnati, there were a group of people that all of a sudden they just started having events. They started having pop-up shops and food vendors and trucks and pop-up concerts. And when I saw that, I said, you know, there is no Calvary. The Calvary is not coming. We have to be the Calvary. And at the time, I had commissioned, in 2015, the North Baton Rouge Blue Ribbon Commission, and one of the members was Byron Washington. And in our first meeting after the Cincinnati trip, in which Byron wasn't there, he talked about a vision he and his wife had called Scotland Saturdays. He knows it well. He was there. He comes
Always
to,
there.
He's always there. He's always there. And you know Scotland Saturday. So all of a sudden, Byron started using the fourth Saturday, last Saturday every month, where he just started having vendors come. Right now, people are meeting there weekly for all kinds of events. And so that was the beginning. What that did is it brought attention, and then we had a tree lighting. That brought attention to Scotlandville. The Scotlandville Plaza is part of the Move BR for financing. You saw the corridor. We have $6 million in ARPA money for housing right behind that strip, all because of a pop-up shop, all because of a tree lighting. It brought the attention of CPEX. I had a chip on my shoulder. I ain't trust nobody. Camille will tell you, Lanisha. But they stuck with me and they worked through the trauma, if you will. And then I remember Camille coming in one day and she say, "Look, we're here if you want us, but if you don't want us, we'll go away." You remember that, Camille?
And
I didn't want them to go away. So that is what it will take, Preston, in that transition. Yes, they move, but I could focus on that all day. But guess what? We got to move forward and do what we need to do to make things better.
Absolutely. Ebony?
I just want to say, because equity is sort of what we're here to address. And every time when I start like that, David probably says, "Uh-oh, that's my boss in the front row." It's probably where she's going with that. But what I want to say is the ability to follow opportunity, to move, to leave, that's a privilege within itself. And I think that we have to acknowledge that there are barriers. There are transportation barriers. There are financial barriers. There are education barriers that are systemic, that are generational, that are focused. And I think that it's easy to say, follow the opportunity, follow the prosperity, follow the jobs, follow the housing, but that in itself is a privilege. And the other part of that is these are legacy neighborhoods. Wow. These are historical neighborhoods. And I think it's, through a planning, through an equity lens, that's a lot to ask people to leave the soil that they grew up on, that their grandmother grew up on, the place they invested, where their grandfather worked at Standard Oil, or their great-grandfather worked at Louisiana Creamery. These are legacy neighborhoods. These are family neighborhoods. So I just want to throw that out there and just make sure that we're keeping that in frame.
Yeah, it's such a crucial point, because the whole point of equity, and I think you said it in your opening comments, and that is, there are families that remain in those communities once you bring in the airport, once you bring in the highway that cuts through a community, that those families that remain will then struggle unless we collectively and very intentionally decide that we're going to continue to support a community, because you're correct. Otherwise, they move to Bon Marché, and then they move to Cortana, and then they move to the Mall of Louisiana, and then they move to Ascension. But we've got to figure out a way to continue to support those who don't have the privilege to be able to pick up and simply say, "I'll just move to the other side of town." So, Lanisha, what are you learning as a result of that? Particularly you've had a chance to study what's happening in North Baton Rouge, and you don't have to redact you can redact the comments. So what are you, in terms of what you're hearing from folks that are right there and say to you, "We're not leaving. We've been here for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years, but we want to ensure that this is a better place to live for us, our children, and our grandchildren"?
I will say that, number one, the people that I have met in this process, I have the utmost respect for, and they are very honest about the fact that they have been fighting this fight for 20, 30 years. We all know someone who has passed away recently fighting this fight as well. And as much barriers or challenges that they have experienced, they will not give up, which to me is, this is what we need. This is the only way that these communities will move forward, that there are people there who continue to care.
Absolutely. So in terms of the road to equitable investment in that strategy, I'd like to invite our audience to participate as well. Are there questions of our panelists? So we've got some incredible experts here on stage. I see a hand up on the right here, and we've got microphones. There we go.
Good morning. Great session. I had a question. I'm not sure who can answer. Could be, but I see that TIF is one tool that's used for investment and redevelopment. My question is there more of a heavy reliance on outside private partners to reinvest in neglected areas? And I'm trying to understand to what extent the city or the parish themselves are willing to invest aside from TIF. Now, Louisiana is different than I'm from, But sometimes the message when you're coming in for an investor is, I want to make sure the city and parish have skin in the game and are investing capital dollars, because my feeling is if you're not investing, why should I? Particularly in those areas that over time have paid taxes over 30, 40 years and don't see that return coming back in their community in terms of capital improvements. So I'm just trying to understand the dynamics. And I don't know the answer, but I know that's something, if I'm an outside investor and I say, can you come in here, Amazon, whatever, to invest? My question is, well, what are you putting on the table so we can partner to see these areas change and to focus on those areas that have been underserved for decades?
Sounds like a perfect question for our councilwoman.
Yes. The number one challenge, and it has taken on several phases since I've been on the council. So in 2013, basically the focus was on downtown. So that's what I come in with, downtown. So there's absolutely no investment or even thought of an investment in the northern part or any disadvantaged community. As we move forward, I would say we have gotten more money in the last 5 years or the last 2 years than ever in the history of Baton Rouge. Whether it's CARES Act money or ARPA money, whatever. But you have to be intentional in leadership and say, we are going to invest in these communities. What happens a lot of time is, for instance, I mentioned the $6 million with Scotlandville. That item was put on the agenda. We've approved it. The developers still can't get the money. They are young black developers because somebody said, why them? You know, somebody said, shouldn't that have gone through a RFP? And so those are the political issues that keep us from moving forward. We still have such a long way to go where we are seen as equitable investment. It is so easy for the council to approve items that that don't even wink, but we question every amount. Some people on our council and in state government when it comes to black community, disinvested communities. So all of that, I believe the anointing starts from the top. And so until you have that kind of leadership that says, I don't care what anybody says, this is what is going to happen. We have a North Baton Rouge transition, one I know that our mayor have. We have to stay true to that playbook, and we have to be unapologetic as a result. So that's what I've seen in communities where we have gone. As I said, the government owes us. They literally owe us in these communities to invest. And until we start saying it like that and saying, you owe me, then it's going to be very difficult that we are not asking, you owe me. You owe my community this. We deserve this. And that is the kind of language that is going to have to be spoken.
We've seen that, though. We've seen, as a part of the Canvas debriefing, we had a follow-up meeting, and as a part of that, we talked about sort of bright spots in our community. And one of those bright spots that a lot of folks pointed out was our park and recreation system. And I think, Cora, if you're in the audience, raise your hand. And
the most equitable public agency in our city parish.
Yeah.
Without a doubt, the most equitable.
And that deserves a round of applause because that required a huge commitment on the part of the community to say that, look, we're willing to pony up a little bit more money. And then as a result of it, we expect to get some really great results. And to hear folks in that group from the Canvas trip, business, community leaders, sort of consistently across the board say that was a good use of our dollars and resources. And in return, what we've seen are the benefits of it. And when the quality of life improves in the community, people want to come back. or they want to stay? I think you're eager to make a follow-up comment or question.
I
And
am, 'cause
apologize
I'm from New
because I
York,
can't
a
see
little
you
more
well.
direct, so let me
Yep.
ask my question a
Yeah.
different way. First of all, Corey, ran the Greenway this morning, the levee loop. It was clean, people out there cutting grass. I guess, did you tell them I was gonna run that thing? It's beautiful. This is to be a little bit more direct, because I was in Lafayette the other day and I asked the same question. There's now this growing movement about doing equity audit of your capital improvement plan. People pay property taxes. And if you look at the north side, to do an analysis of how much taxes were paid over a 20-year period, and then compare it to how much was invested back of the same taxpayer money they put into the city general fund. That is what I'm suggesting. I don't know Louisiana, but many places there's now calling an equity audit or an equity assessment, and very often people are surprised that they may get back 10% to 20%, which means those capital dollars are being invested other places. So my question is, as an outside investor, if I'm going to an area, I want to make sure the city also or parish understands that there is money collected over time. As you said owed. It to me is a contract, so to speak. I give you tax dollars, I get resources and investment back in return. So has an equity audit ever been done to determine how fair the investment has been? Because I think that would be illuminating to find out that answer.
The only time we had anything, we never had an equity audit, but I want one. But the only time we really had where we saw that was during like the green light plan. You know, those were the big parish-wide plans, green light plan, where we dealt with roads and highways. And we saw at that time 8% of the funding went to the northern part. We had 2 streets in each community, and they were short streets. So I don't know what an equity audit is, but I do want one. And they could start with the budget that we're going to approve Tuesday, and maybe within a year we could do it. So I would like to talk to you. I like the idea, and they have the money to pay for it. And so let's do it.
Well, great. We've got time for one more short question if there's anyone else in the audience. Yes. A microphone is coming to you. Let's see.
Good morning.
Uh-oh, we've got 2 questions.
The Metro
Gotta make-
Council,
Somebody's got to make it short. To my
the
left.
Metro Council recently voted in favor of incorporating the international building codes in Baton Rouge, and the state did that shortly thereafter. Here in Baton Rouge, that will go into effect in June. And we've been working with some mom and pop landlords, and they have a lot of concerns about this. But how do each of you or some of you think this will impact the issue of affordable housing, safe, clean housing? Will it be sort of a game changer in some of these disenfranchised communities or not? And it's 30 pages long, and I couldn't get through it.
Thank you, Pam. Yes, it can be a game changer specifically for new development. So new construction a lot of times is for higher density affordable housing is templated, right, according to international building code. And so having that ability to, get plans stamped that need, very little, specificity due to the site is really important and will speed up construction of new housing. On the flip side, renovation and upkeep of existing housing might run into a little bit of problems. People not familiar with the existing, with the new code and more familiar with the previous code. But for new construction, certainly it is a great asset.
And we'll give the last question to, thank you, Gretchen, to my college dean, Dean Andrews.
How are we doing this morning?
Great, thanks.
This is a great panel. I want to ask a question in terms of the private sector. How do we get the private sector involved in this? In other words, the public sector is making the ground fertile for private sector investment. So I think the gentleman was talking about an equity audit. What about the private banks in terms of CRA? Are they investing in this community as well? So I think we need to get the private sector involved in terms of redeveloping these communities.
Sure, I have some ideas. One thing that's really important in working with financial institutions specifically is on the underwriting and the appraisal of property in communities like in North Baton Rouge. There have been studies across the country with appraisers looking at property in areas with blight, infrastructure issues compared to properties in areas with more modern infrastructure and less blight, and also that there are some racial biases by appraisers as well, and that's been documented. And so working with the financial institutions to kind of weed out that behavior is number one. Also, in terms of the underwriting, especially in North Baton Rouge, we have a huge problem with titles being cloudy due to air property issues. And so we're trying to work out some solutions with banks so that they can issue renovation loans or new home loans to people with some blemishes on their title due to air property issues and the way that property has been passed down through generations in these communities.
And if I could just add one thing, we talked a lot about young developers, young Black developers under 35. Our community does not have any CDFIs. Our banks are not acting as innovative access to capital to spur the development of affordable housing. And because of that, there's a lot of national funding we can leverage with that we're leaving on the table. So, we recently had a housing study that showed we were about 30,000 units behind the need as it comes to affordable housing units. And we all know that's, subjective. But we are not providing access to capital to entrepreneurs, to small developers who are doing 1-4-unit deals in Scotlandville and who are really pooling their own money, groups of young men to get this development done. And we as a community, the private sector has to step up and say, how do we increase access to flexible capital for our developers to meet the affordable housing need? So that's a really significant way the private sector, particularly banks, can show up and meet their CRA requirements. But we need a CDFI, more than one, in this community.
That's good. Just a note, as it relates to public sector, one of the experiences also is when you have an investor, I wouldn't even say an investor, it could either be philanthropic or whatever. What we find, if they aren't connected to the community and they just want to do good, they will make decisions that are not in the best interest, the best location, or the need of the community. It's just because, and when you question that, we look ungrateful, or it's like, it's my money. And so I'd rather not have it than to have to go through that, because to me, a gift is only as good as the benefit of the person to receive it. If you want to give me a Cadillac and the house is falling down and I really need you to do my roof, I don't need your Cadillac. And so those are some of the things that a message I would have for persons in the public sector, to don't feel like you doing these communities a favor when it's for you and your ego, and it's not really in the best interest of the community, and you haven't taken into consideration the entire plan or scope that we've been working on to make things happen in our community.
Ladies and gentlemen, Councilwoman Shawna Banks talked about hope and that she's hopeful, and I think many of us are. I will tell you today, having listened to this panel this morning, that I am likewise hopeful. I think that we have a path. Dean Andrews, I believe that with the combination of business, the philanthropic community, nonprofits that are scattered all about in this community that are very intentional in planning for our future and doing good work, that we have a path forward, but it's only if we really take the time, work really hard, roll up our sleeves, and ensure that there's action that follow these plans. Ladies and gentlemen, one more round of applause for our panelists. Thank you so very much. And for those of you who need CLE, there are forms right outside the doorways. Thanks again and have a great rest of the conference.